Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله ما فهم and
Alhamdulillah.
everyone.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Alhamdulillah. Allahu Akbar. Let me see. My camera off. Yeah. Okay, straight. Tyson, how do I see you? Do I go to the chat and look for you?
Yeah, if you go to participants, you should be able to see me there, right?
Participants. Yeah, I got you. All right, alhamdulillah. We're gonna give folks maybe about 3 more minutes to check in. I pray all is well with everyone. Abdul Shakur, where are you? Where are you?
I'm in Florida.
Which part?
Um, I'm actually about 45 minutes outside of Tampa, so I'm in Dade City.
Oh, okay, okay. So what kind of weather y'all got down there?
Hot, my brother, hot.
Oh yeah, okay. What you call hot? You down there, what do you call hot?
Well, I'm from New York, so this hot is I'm talking about we've been having some 98-degree weather, close to 100
Oh wow.
on
Wow.
certain days. It's kind of it can be a rainy state as well at times, but we haven't been getting a lot of rain. And when we do, as soon as it stops, you can feel the heat. So,
Okay. Well, you get wet and dry real quick though, huh? I
oh, that's fun.
I I experienced that. Did you go to Elijahville when we were there with the imam?
No, no, sir.
No? Okay. Yeah, but that was one of those situations where yeah, we would have those flash whatever rains. But just hold on, you'll be dry in a few minutes.
Wow, it must have
It
been
was
pretty
really
hot.
yeah, it was very, very hot. But another thing that we experienced there was that we really didn't know what dark was until you were in the dark outside the city. No, no other kind of lights, no street lights or what have you. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Wallahi, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Now that
That's pretty dark.
natural, serious dark. So you start understanding where why quote unquote primitive man had all these spooky things about the darkness, right? Because it be some
Oh,
real
that's funny.
beasts, out there, and some snatch you in the dark. It's like shit. That's the boogeyman. But it's like it's a really nature. When you see nature at its how can you say its natural functioning, it brings out aspects of your own nature that otherwise couldn't be brought out. So all those things, the weather, the temperature, the light and dark, and the stars. When you see the stars at night in their natural, unobstructed state, it's like, man, it's really, 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 really marvelous. Alhamdulillah. But Steve, how you doing, man? And Imam Joel, it's good to see y'all.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. How you doing? How's the weather down there in Winston-Salem?
We had a break yesterday. It rained and
Mm-hmm.
gave us about 80 degrees, but it's gonna be back in the 90s today. So
Is
one day
that
of mercy.
mashallah, alhamdulillah.
So
That's good to do what you can to stay cool, inshallah.
yeah, air conditioner working overtime. So
All right. So My camera's been off all the time. So Tyson, I'm gonna toss it to you, and you do what you do. All right. Appreciate it. Bismillah.
Yeah.
You can go ahead.
Alhamdulillah. Okay. I greatly appreciate it as well. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everyone. And Imam Fahim, I always greatly appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of the work. And just so folks are aware, it was Imam Fahim. Imam Fahim was like, I need you to ride with me. So I wasn't looking for the opportunity to share in this way. But Imam Fahim was like, we're gonna continue to rise workshops, and I need you to ride with me. So I said, okay, whatever you need, inshallah, I'll be there for that. And it's been really enjoyable for me because alhamdulillah, right? Like I have I'll give just a little bit of context before jumping into what we're going to talk about this morning. I've been running this education consultancy firm. So my company is called Freedom Soul Media Education Initiatives, and I've been running that since 2016. Prior to that, I taught in schools here in California. I think I started teaching in the early 2000s. So just from the standpoint of personally working in education, I've been doing it for a number of years, and working in the school system. And my father, he was a teacher before me as well. And he told me, don't become a teacher. And not on some like disobedient stuff. I became a teacher, but it was the easiest way for me to be able to bring in some money, take care of my family. I was married at the time. So my wife and I, we were young, in our 20s, and I had just gotten married. And then I was also working on my music. So some people know me from my music. I have a number of albums that I recorded. I performed domestically. I performed internationally, like toured quite a bit. And the first label that I was on was a Muslim-owned label located here in the Bay Area. It's called Remarkable Current. And so doing my music, teaching, I'd have these long breaks during the school year, have a long break during the summer. So I'd always schedule my bigger tours during that time. But in 2016, when I released my first book, Black Boy Poems, that's when I was like, I'm going to be able to use this, get this book into the schools, because it's going to be a valuable educational resource for teachers. They want to talk about Black students don't want to read, or they're not reading at the levels that they're supposed to be at, these arbitrary levels that they've created to define what educational success looks like. I was like, okay, you could say that, but if I put my book, or if we put some of these other books in front of Black students that are really telling them about themselves, their history, their culture, and their tradition, they're going to pick that up and they're going to read that. And I had the experience so often, and I'm very thankful that the community was very receptive to my book, Black Boy Poems, which I call a social and political commentary, that like people will still to this day, alhamdulillah, like they'll stop me and they'll be like, Tyson, oh, I got your book, Black Boy Poems, especially young people. And I've had young folks approach me and say, I was locked up in juvenile hall and I read your book, or I was in a jail and I read your book, I was in prison and I read your book, or I was at my homie's house and they had your book on the bookshelf and it just looked cool and I picked it up and I read it. And so many folks will say, when I saw your book, I read it from cover to cover, because they see themselves in it. And then, inshallah, the information in there is beneficial information as well. But because of that, that's all I was saying, I knew that it would be a very effective educational resource. And I wanted to create more relationships with schools and school districts to make sure that all students had access to information like that, but especially our students who are in those schools. The ultimate goal is what the Deen community has been doing for so many years, which is based on the history that preceded it in the Nation of Islam, which Imam Fahim has been telling us about. We got to have our own schools, right? So until we get back to the point where we can control all of those resources within our community, we got to deal with the reality that we have around us. So I was like, I can take this book, I can take these educational resources that we create, and I can occupy space in schools right now and make sure that our young people are being taken care of, or at least they're being exposed to some of this information at some point in time in their educational history, as opposed to the brainwashing, propagandized white supremacist narrative that's being forced down their throats and forced into their minds on a daily basis in schools. So this team been doing in more space, having a direct impact on students, having a direct impact on teachers, on principals, on district leadership, and really changing the situation that is around our students, the communities that are those learning communities, and just finding more and more ways to be that direct force of change. And like Imam Fahimi spoke to it a little bit yesterday in the khutbah that he gave, and he was talking about the Quran, and he's been doing these series doing the series of khutbahs where he's really encouraging all of us. We need to spend more time with the Quran. We need to spend more time learning the word of Allah, and not just learning it where it's here in our minds, where it's part of how we move. And that's something that in my studies always stood out about the way that the Prophet was described, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when Aisha radiallahu anha was asked a question about how was he like, what was his character like. She described him as the Quran walking. He was a walking Quran, like he gave life to the text. And so he's been imploring us, increase your relationship, increase your knowledge and your understanding of it, master it, embody it, live the word, right? And when you do that, it's a heavy word. The word has force. It occupies space. It can be transformative. And with this knowledge and with this information, when this stuff comes into, of course, like Islamic knowledge, but the knowledge of our history and culture and tradition, when it comes into those learning spaces, it's transformative because it's heavy. When young people get a chance to really see, oh, this is what we come from. This is what we've been about. This is what our people have really been doing, as opposed to, you know what your history is? Your people were slaves. Then Abraham Lincoln freed them, or white people freed them. And then Jim Crow, segregation, Dr. King, I have a dream, and everything's okay now. That's the way that they want to tell our story. No, it's so much deeper than that. So when they get that information, it's heavy. And then not only that, when they're receiving that information from a proud Black-led organization that is firmly rooted in the Black community, in the Black tradition, those people got to move different. Like I pull up, I'm at the school, I'm talking to the teachers. Students will tell me this is the way that I'm being treated in class. This is what we're being taught. Okay, let me have a conversation with your teacher. Let me have a conversation with your administrators. Let me have a conversation with your district people, with the superintendent in the district. And we create that change around those students. So inshallah, we continue to do that work. And so this piece right here, the book Carry On Tradition, is an important evolutionary step in the way that we can bring more of that content to all of our communities, especially to these schools, and make sure that our young people see themselves correctly. And it's exciting. So for me, right, I mean, the book is still new. I released the book on May 19th of this year. So where are we at right now? This is July, 2 months. It'll be 2 months and a couple of weeks that the book has been out. And I haven't had an opportunity to really reflect on it like we're doing now and take it piece by piece and look at ways to share it with the community, because I was so focused on, let me write it and let me get it to the people. So that's another reason why I really appreciate this opportunity with you all here. And inshallah, it's just beneficial. I know it's gonna, if I just want to focus on it in a quote unquote selfish way, it'll be really beneficial for me because it'll help with how I can support these schools that are going to be purchasing this book, students that are going to be reading this book, the curriculum that we're creating for it, to put it in front of students, and to have this opportunity to do, some workshop with y'all hear feedback and all of that, like, thank you for that, because it's going to make the way that this work expands into other places better. And, you know, who better to do that with them, with our community and with our people. So thank you all for that. And we'll jump in. And as a way to get started, I want to do a quick recap of everything that we've talked about in text. Quick recap, and then we'll get into the story that we're going to be talking about today, which is the sister Queen Nanny from Jamaica. Powerful, powerful history. All right, so I'm going to share screen and we'll move into it. Okay. Inshallah, y'all are able to, you can see the screen?
Yes, sir.
I appreciate you, brother. Thank you very much for that. So with the book Carry On Tradition, again, that's the title. And what it stands for is everything that I think the words are clearly trying to communicate to us. This book is a representation of how our people have carried on the very specific tradition of righteous resistance, rebellion, freedom fighting, revolution making, liberation making. That's such an important part of our story here in the Western Hemisphere. It's what our people have been doing. And it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to be able to demonstrate it. So what I wanted to do with the book was I wanted to take a few, because there's so many examples of this. I said, let me take a few of these examples where our people have demonstrated this powerful tradition for centuries. So where we started in the 1400s. So this is me creatively trying to depict this moment in 1441, where the first big encounter happened between the Portuguese and West African peoples that resulted in the Portuguese leaving the West African coast with 12 of our ancestors and brought them back to Portugal to be forcibly enslaved. So by many historical accounts, they'll pinpoint this moment as the first where Western European countries begin to establish what we know is the institution of forced enslavement, the triangular trade, the slave trade, all of that. Like, this was one of those first moments. But what doesn't get talked about oftentimes is what our people did. So immediately after that in the book, we have the response to 1441, where both of the captains that were responsible for that initial trip, when they came back for subsequent trips to try to raid the the coast of West Africa and steal more of our brothers and sisters, our people responded and they destroyed those folks. They had such an impact on Portugal that Prince Henry made the decision to stop all of those slave raids to the coast of West Africa for several years because they lost too much. That was the response. Then we talk about how our brothers and sisters ended up from Africa here in the Western Hemisphere, also parts of Europe, but the majority of our folks ended up here in the Western Hemisphere. So we talked about the ways that our people rebelled at sea. And in that, we talked about what happened on the coast, how our people organized in order to fight back on the coast when slave traders were coming up, right? Or how they would attack the ships when they were trying to load our brothers and sisters onto the ships. And then, of course, the way that our brothers and sisters rebelled while they were on the ships, constantly engaging in resistance and rebellion. And I was traveling over the past 2 weeks. One of the places that I went to in my travels was Montgomery, Alabama. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to visit Montgomery before. If you've been there within the past couple of years, one of the reasons why I wanted to go, of course, there's a lot of history there. I wanted to go to the museum that the brother Brian Stevenson put together, the Equal Justice Initiative Museum. And the whole museum is dedicated to the history of lynching. And he also talks about this history of enslavement to mass incarceration, right? So he makes that connection that the system of forced enslavement has simply evolved into the system of mass incarceration here in the United States. If you haven't been there, you got to go to that museum. It's so deep. It's so heavy. The way that he talks about this history that's in front of us right now with the rebellion at sea, or the way that our ancestors were taken from Africa and brought here to the Western Hemisphere. That's the very first part of the journey. So when you walk in, there's this big screen that you see, and it's just these waves, like these ocean waves. So you just see the water crash, there's music in the background, and then he has this text that's popping up on the screen that's telling you about the millions and millions of our brothers and sisters who were brought across, but also those that made the decision not to make that journey when they were on those ships. Many folks took their own lives, or took their lives into their hands and said, I'm not going to go see what's on the other side of this boat. We're going to stop it right here, or we're going to try to swim back, or whatever. And so it's just a really powerful way of depicting that. If y'all haven't been, please go. I've never seen a museum dedicated to our history in that way that was that beautiful, that stunning. And you need time, like you need hours to be in there, because it's just so much information. There's a lot of interactive parts to the exhibits that are there. And I'm telling you, if you go there, you're just gonna see something that's amazing. So anyway, we had that part of the story. Then that brings us to the Western Hemisphere. So we started talking about some of the major uprisings and rebellions that our people engaged in. So we had, the first one was the tradition of Santo Domingo, which takes place on the island of Haiti. And we gave the history to it, the lead up to it. We talked about our brothers and sisters who were there. So some historians will say that there were African peoples there through colonization as early as the late 1400s, like 1498, 1499. Some will say early 1500s. So African peoples were there. And then the very first major rebellion, collective uprising, took place in 1521 on Christmas Day. So we have in this picture, the way that I created it, I have a brother and sister at the front, because it was said that it was organized by a man and a woman. They were the ones who called everybody together. They were the ones who strategized. We're going to attack. We're going to attack on this day. This is what we're going to attack. It happened on the plantation that was owned by Diego Colon, who was Christopher Columbus's son. And they raided for weapons. They organized their armed defense, and they motivated people to participate in it. And their goal was to obliterate the institution of forced enslavement. Like from the very beginning, it was, we want to make sure that this system no longer exists for our people to be free. And it's powerful history. And then we talk about the legacy aspect of it. So that's where we were. Then we went from that, and then we talked about this brother right here, the brother named Gaspar Yanga. And his story takes place in modern day Mexico, around the area of Veracruz, and how he fought against the Spanish for more than 3 decades in order for his people to be free. And eventually the Spanish had to negotiate a treaty with him saying, we don't want to fight you no more. We can't defeat you. Your people are raiding our caravans. Look, we need this to stop. So what do you need? So we know what was in the treaty that Gaspar Yanga signed with the Spanish. And the legacy of that was his people remained free all the way up until Mexico wins its war of independence from Spain and ends the institution of forced enslavement. So he was doing this in the 1500s going into the 1600s. Mexico wins its independence from Spain in 1820. They started with 1810, 1811. So around 1820, in the early 1820s, I'm forgetting the exact year right now. And then Vicente Guerrero, who was the first Black president of Mexico, he's the one who, through executive decree, abolishes slavery in Mexico, making Mexico the first country in North America to ever abolish slavery. And that's in 1829, 1830, 1831. So more than 3 decades before the 13th Amendment gets added to the Constitution in the United States. And of course, the 13th Amendment still allows slavery to be here, except as a punishment for a crime. So we talk about this brother. We talked about this sister right here, Queen Nzinga, who brings us back to the African continent and how she fought against the Portuguese for more than 3 decades in order to keep her people free from Portuguese imperialism, Portuguese enslavement. And it's just a powerful story. So we went into that. And in that, we talked about some of the major battles that Nzinga had to fight with her people against the Portuguese. And then so we'll come back to Queen Nanny in a minute. The last time that we were together, we were talking about the Haitian Revolution, because I was in Louisiana, and the United States doesn't get Louisiana without the Haitian Revolution. So we went into the origins of the Haitian Revolution and how there's some direct connection to Islamic history there, where there were some leaders who were suspected to be Muslim. Talked about a brother by the name of Duddy Bookman. His name is right here in the text. And there are some folks who suspect he was called Bookman because he was a man of the book. And what book were they talking about? The Quran, meaning that he was Hafiz of Quran, that he had memorized the Quran. And there was another name that we had mentioned last time. We talked about a brother by the name of Makandel, who his name became synonymous with poisoning because he was so adept at herbs for healing. But if you my enemy, I can use herbs to harm you as well. And so he used his knowledge of medicine, of herbs, to be a revolutionary tool to help fight for the freedom of his people. And he was so effective with that the French began to refer to poison as macandel, because he had used that in such an effective way. All right, so then we got into the story of some of the major Haitian revolutionary leaders. We talked about Toussaint Louverture. We went through his history, his rise into power, becoming the leader of the Haitian Revolution, and then his legacy. And then we talked about Jean-Jacques Dessalines, him before the revolution starts, joining the revolution. We emphasize this image right here and this history that this represents, where when he joined the revolution, he was trained as a soldier. And he was trained by, I'm trying to depict this sister right here, who was known as Mantu or Toya, because she was from the women of Dahomey, and she was one of the warriors of Dahomey. So in Dahomey, in that kingdom, they begin to raise up a trained military of women. And so when she was captured from her homeland, brought across the Western Hemisphere, forcibly enslaved, she was originally one of those warrior women of Dahomey. And so when she gets here to Haiti, the Haitian Revolution breaks out. Folks recognize, like, you got military knowledge and expertise. You need to be training our soldiers, which she did, and she did for years. One of the soldiers that she trained was Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who eventually becomes the leader of Haiti. So we talk about him as Lieutenant Dessalines, so rising up in the Haitian Revolutionary Army. Then we spend a little bit of time talking about this part right here, the Avenged America. So after the Haitian Revolution is complete and the Spanish, the French, the British, everybody's been vanquished, they stand alone as the leaders of a new nation, right? And he gives his speech talking about, I have avenged America for the wrong that these Western Europeans have inflicted on this land, on the native and the indigenous people of this land, on all of us and our ancestors before us. I have avenged America for that. And then we talked about the Haitian Constitution, and then we talked about the legacy of Dessalines. So we've been bringing this in, and we've had stories where we focused on sisters who were the leaders of movements, brothers who were the leaders of movements, collective movements. And so we're going to add one more story today. So let me get back up here to the sister, Queen Nanny. So I don't know if anybody here is Jamaican ancestry. If you spent time in Jamaica, if you have been to Jamaica, you've probably seen imagery of Queen Nanny. Some of you maybe have studied Queen Nanny before. Her story is a little bit known than maybe some of these other figures that have been covered in the book. But one thing about her, though, we don't know her origins. So when you look at the history on Queen Nanny, you'll see some people who say that, yes, she was actually born in Africa. And then you'll see some people who say, no, she was born in Jamaica. There's no clear information on that. So one thing that comes up quite a bit in her story is that they say that she embodied characteristics of the Ashanti. And so that's why I have in here Nanny of the Ashanti, because it's pretty common for people to say that about her. And then the way that I start the story of her is talking about the history, the culture of the Ashanti people. And I don't know if anybody on here has done their ancestry, their DNA. I did it last year, actually. I did African ancestry. And it came back that I think it was like 32, maybe 35% of our DNA comes from the Cameroon, comes from people by the name of the Bamalinke. And then we have like Nigerian, we have a lot of West African. It was like 75, almost 80% is West African, just mixed all over. But the group that came through the strongest was the Bamalinke of Cameroon. And Imam Fahim, I got you. Thank you. And so they say that she was from the Ashanti people, whether she was born on the African continent or born in Jamaica, up for debate. But what we know for sure, without a doubt, after the British took control over Jamaica, you had a number of African peoples who had been fighting back, of course, for their freedom and their liberation. And some of them began to form these maroon communities. And so in this picture right here, what's being depicted is one of the strategies of the Jamaicans who were fighting for their freedom. They would escape the lowlands and they would retreat to the highlands, and then they would build these free communities there. So Nanny did the same thing, and she had a couple of brothers who also became leaders of these maroon communities. And what they knew was the British, they're not going to stop. They're going to come for us. And so one of the really big or powerful strongholds of the maroon communities was known as Nanny Town. This was the community that Nanny led. And they were right. The British came. So what did they have to do? They had to fight. They had to fight to protect their people. They had to fight to protect their land. And in the stories, in the history, and this is from British sources as well as from Jamaican sources, you'll see them talk about Nanny's military prowess, her strategic mind, the way that she would lay traps for the British soldiers that were coming in order to try to fight against her people, the way that she was able to take situations. So if something happened, she would find ways to be able to use that situation in favor of her people. And this image right here I created, and I have her, of course, holding, because they talked about like she would use a machete, but I have her holding a weapon because she was willing to stand in front of her people and fight for her people. And I think that image is so important. Again, for those who were on earlier, and I was talking about how we're able to do this through the education consultancy firm, we have this information going into the schools. It's so powerful for the students to be able to see their history this way. Like, wait, our people did that? And, you know, and thinking about this recap that we just did, yeah, not only did our people do that in Jamaica, our people did that on the African continent, our people did that in Mexico, our people did that all throughout North America, all throughout the Caribbean, all throughout South America. It's a continuous tradition. And we can show where it was happening in the 1400s. It was happening in every decade of the 1500s. It happened in every decade of the 1600s, every decade of the 1700s, every decade of the 1800s, every decade of the 1900s. And it's still happening to this day. So when you see a sister like this being depicted and she's willing to fight for her people, that spirit, that knowledge that's in her mind, that's in her body, that commitment to her people, you can't separate that from what we saw here in the United States in the 20th century. You can't separate that from what we see in the 21st century when our people are still standing up and fighting for their freedom. It's the same tradition. It's the same spirit. It's the same energy. So the Maroon Wars, they take place, and Nanny was one of the major leaders in the Maroon Wars, and they fought for years against the British. And eventually, they, of course, maintain their freedom, maintain the freedom of their land, maintain the freedom of their community. And in Jamaica to this day, there's a cultural distinction that's made between Jamaicans. Like, oh, are you a descendant of the Maroons, who are people who have been free for such a long time? Or did your people come from the other experience of enslavement in Jamaica? And so this image right here, I'll wrap up here. This is the only one in the book Well, one of the only ones in the book where the legacy image, I don't have the figure looking at the camera or looking at the screen, because there's a very popular depiction of Queen Nanny in Jamaica, which is a profile image of her. So if you had, I think she's on the $500 note in Jamaica. And so if you've ever seen that bill, you'll see this kind of portrait shot of her. And, you know, she has her head wrap on and all of that. So that was me trying to do an artistic recreation of that. But her legacy is extremely, extremely powerful globally, especially in Jamaica. She's the only woman who's celebrated as a national hero in Jamaica because of how she stood up and she fought for her people, embodying the tradition that we've been talking about. So we got Queen Nanny in there, and the stories just continue. And the way that the book works, last piece, it's a linear book. So we started in 1441. So by the time we get to Queen Nanny, we're around the mid to late 1700s. So then the story that comes after Queen Nanny in that linear piece is the Haitian Revolution. I just jumped ahead last week because I was in Louisiana. So then the Haitian Revolution takes us from 1791 to 1804. So then after this, the rest of those stories take place in the 1800s, and then we get to the 1900s. So we'll pick up next time. But I appreciate it. Inshallah, it was beneficial. Imam Fahim, thank you for the time. And we're all ready, willing students, and looking forward to what you're going to be presenting this morning.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. It's we are being reintroduced to ourselves, and that is a blessing. That is a blessing. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, Tyson. So let's carry on and make sure where am I? All right. So today we're continuing with large title, the last resurrection and the Renaissance. This is I'm encapsulating a very, very long road. It just in that title. And so we're like going city blocks at a time in this journey. Alhamdulillah, and thank you for being here. I qualified that we are still speaking of the role of W.D. Farad and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in shaping Imam W.D. Muhammad, rahimahullah. But this segment is Islamic ethics, and 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I don't have specific time on it, whenever it was that we began speaking about the noble lie, because we're still speaking to and we're still speaking into sort of like the natural criticism and the natural rejection. I say it's natural for people who subscribe to al-Islam in its quote unquote proper form, with everything, the aqidah and the tanzih and all of that. It's natural on first order to say that's wrong. It's natural, to say, when someone said God came in the person of Master Farad Muhammad, subhanallah, that's wrong. Astaghfirullah, that's wrong. Elijah Muhammad said he's the last messenger. Astaghfirullah, uzubillah. It's natural for a Muslim who has embraced the Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, absent any other information, to take that position. So, relatively speaking, no harm, no foul in terms of the individual who take that position. However, that's not the end. That's not the answer. And what we're speaking to is trying to provide those innocent people, minds, hearts, spirits, with another context for them to perhaps gain another judgment of what it is that they have seen, heard, and experienced that has been defined or identified for them as that's what the Nation of Islam of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was and is. Speaking of the history, so we have to cover this territory because it's natural. There's a Quranic verse that comes to mind that this is a marginal note you can add to that vision, and that is God says, I'm making in the earth a Khalifa. And then the angel said, what will you create something that will cause mischief and bloodshed? Right? And then further on, Allah said, nevertheless, I know what you don't know. So just in that picture, a simple reflection on it is that God says, I'm doing something. The angel's reply suggests that they have some idea of the potential consequences of what it is that he's saying that he's going to create, and that is it would be something that could do some harm. And God is saying, nevertheless, I know what you don't know. Yeah, I'm not saying God. He didn't say, no, you're wrong. No, he said, I know what you don't know. And that speaks also to the ethics of the situation. Simple definition, a simple expression of ethics is when you have to make a choice between two good things or a choice between two bad things, right? You six in one hand, half dozen in the other. Caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. Those kinds of language. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Though those are all statements about ethical dilemmas, ethical challenges. And that's the nature of man. That's the nature of man's life. The nature of man's life is we have to make it, and that's not, let me say, they are some of the hardest decisions that you have to make in life. You have two good things, but you can only choose one of them. You have two bad things, but you can only choose one of them. This is another reason why chess is like life. Chess is like life because you have to make a move. There is no passing in chess, right? You have to make a move. And no matter what move you make, there's going to be some benefit and some harm. There's going to be some advantage, I should say. There's going to be some advantage and there's going to be some disadvantage in every move you make. So you're always trying to make the best move under the circumstances. And that is the very meaning of khayr, the very meaning of khayr in Quran. Khayr fastabiqul khayrat. Allah says, so strive after the khayr. And what is the khayr? The khayr literally is what's best under the circumstances. So there's in the formal sense, Imam Muhammad has said, he has a long teaching for us on it. The idea of the secular, classical, English, even Greek word term moral. It's not an Islamic term, but slow up, don't react to that, too quick. Moral, the term moral, M-O-R-A-L, I want to be clear, is not an Islamic term. It's a term that fits a paradigm from the mind that gave birth to the word, because words are containers, right? So there's an idea, there's a principle, there's a value that the leaders of a given society, they come to, and then they say, okay, we need a word to tell people what this is. Okay, so we're going to moral. We're going to use the word moral. And simplistically speaking, moral means your values as your values and what dictates your conscience, right? And so that word moral is in the vocabulary. You speak that language, and then so therefore that definition, you're bound by that definition in that sense. But that word was not born out of the Quran. That word was not born out of al-Islam. So that word, while we value the idea of conscience and we value the idea of right and wrong, all of which are part and parcel of the word moral, but that's not our word, because there's a limitation to that word moral that sets boundaries on literally on human conscience. For example, that word moral sets boundaries on human conscience, boundaries which nature will not necessarily do. So I know, it's getting a little thick right here, but that's what we're dealing with. I mean, that's the reality. So the point is, what is the word that has, when the Imam explains it, this word means, once he says no, moral is not our word, doesn't mean that we don't have morals. It doesn't mean that we embrace immorality, blah blah blah, because you're doing all that talking using the word itself, right? I'm just saying the limitations of the word and the source of the meaning of the word is not, it does not give to the society what Allah gives to the society. And I'm not just talking about freedom. I don't have to worry about morals, because moral is not an Islamic term. No, I ain't saying nothing like that. The point is, it's limited in its scope of what it can do. For some, if you know the history of Europe and the rest of these nations out of which this word comes, you say, well, that's up from where y'all coming. It's like, yeah, you need some morals, right? Alhamdulillah, that's great. But that's not it was good. It was a movement up for those people in that situation. And the term and the vocabulary built for those who are leading and hoping to bring the civilizational state up, it was an advancement. But the word moral is not as profound and is not connected and not rooted in nature, both of creation and the nature of the human being, as is the Quranic term, right? The Quranic term, Imam's explanation, tahara, and the tahara has to do with purification. It has purification, and it's talking about the growth of purification. And so it's something that there's layers and there's levels and there's growth. There's levels of purity, right? There's levels of purity, levels of perfecting our behaviors, et cetera, morality, is part and parcel of that, but it's just that. It's just part and parcel of that, given their definition, the definition of those who gave us the term. The goal is to become more pure. So there's a level of purity that one is on, and that thing that is called morality, being conscious of what the values and so many other things, conscientiousness, your sense of obligation, sense of responsibility, a sense of what's right and wrong under the circumstance, taking all those things into mind and obeying the best of it, then you're going to get better and better and better. You're going to grow and grow and grow. But for us, we don't call that growth in the formal sense, following the Imam's lead. We're not identifying it as morality. We're identifying it as growth in purification. Growth in purification. Speaking of it, not in terms of right and wrong. We're speaking of it in terms of growth of purification. Okay, like this. This is it, and this is more of the philosophical side of al-Islam, and I want us to understand this.